Hey there everyone! Welcome to the channel where a furry doggo reads D&D horror stories. In my search for tabletop cringe, I come across a lot of stories involving one of the most feared concepts that can plague a table: main character syndrome. Players that get this affliction can be a detriment to everyone else at the table's fun, and in today's episode of Dungeons & Dragons Horror Stories, we have 4 examples of this. So, let's get right into the stories. What? Did you think I forgot to include Lucky? Of course not. Y'all yell at me when he doesn't make an appearance. Now, let's get into these stories for real this time. Naked Came the Stranger by Reddit user Charlie LaRoux. It has taken a while for me to write this, but this is the tale of my first foray into a campaign, including someone outside my immediate friend group. People involved are the following: DM, me, incredibly new, having only run a few one-off sessions for my family and best friend. Cleric, DM's girlfriend, huge Critical Role fan, loves to roleplay and just wanting to play D&D. Rogue, homebrew something or other, a self-proclaimed experienced DM that I had roleplayed with on other games and had several months of rapport with. Session 0 was simple, just introducing the 2 players, setting off rules, and what the players wanted. Free roam and sandbox was chief among them, with a heavy focus on roleplay. It all started off great, with a simple, "This is my world, and this is the town you will start in." Cleric had created a character based on the starting town, while Rogue had created an Eladrin traveler type. Session 1 rolls around, and Cleric hangs around the gate, with people watching, as an Eladrin begins to roll up on horseback. I describe a crowd streaming in through the gates, and several wagons carrying goods of interest. In the small silence afterwards, Rogue pipes up with, quote, "I stripped naked, tuck my armor and my clothes into my saddlebags." Being a new DM, I am absolutely awestruck, and simply ask if I heard him right. Rogue doubles down, repeating his statement, and saying he rides up to the guards at the gate. Still absolutely flabbergasted, I ask Cleric and Rogue to describe their characters, and roleplay ensues. Cleric, being the peacemaker, strikes up a conversation and attempts to get the Rogue to cover himself. A minor argument ensues, with the Cleric failing to convince the Rogue to clothe himself in the slightest, with the Rogue stating, quote, "I have no idea of your social customs. I am an Eladrin." Me, horrified, and still not knowing what to do, threw in a guard to try and get the subject off of this, and potentially defuse this lewd bomb. The guard told him in no uncertain terms that public nudity was not allowed, and to put on some clothes. Somehow, the Cleric and the guard convinced him, but only to tie a shirt around his waist, barely covering his bits, before he attempted to ride through the gates. Mortified, I threw in the original quest giver, a captain of the city guard, and the Cleric's father, into the fray in a vain attempt to fix what was supposed to be a simple entrance into the city, with a PC guide and a quest that tied in. At the first attempt by the captain to curtail the pathetic attempt of the Rogue to hide his parts, he cast a sleep spell. I had no idea if this was allowed at the time, and, in hindsight, I think he was bending or breaking the rules. Both guards fell unconscious, and the Cleric and the 90% naked Rogue absconded, fleeing through back alleys to the nearest tavern. Some begging and pleading out of character and in character got the Rogue to put on some damn clothes before they entered the tavern. It was around this point where the initial fun of finally getting to run and play D&D began to wear off, and I realized how much I had to fight to be heard over Rogue's constant interruptions. Consequences roll as they find a table in the tavern. Wanting to get back to some semblance of normalcy, I begin to chat up the pair with a waiter, to which the Rogue dismisses immediately in the middle of a conversation with Cleric. Moving on then, mage hunters begin questioning folk in the tavern if they had seen the commotion at the gates and who had been involved. When, mid-narration, again, the rogue interrupts and, with a terrible roll, tears the main mage hunter's coin purse off before fleeing. Cleric, not wanting to be left behind, heads along for the ride. Some rolls later, they end up at the cleric's house, and trying to get back to some semblance of a plot, they find a hidden tunnel in a room inside, leading to an underground railway, tying in Rogue and Cleric's backstory together. The session ends, and a few days pass as both players work on their backstory and get quite invested in it. Session 2 begins, and all semblance of politeness or social graces falls away from Rogue, as he constantly interrupts both Cleric and myself to state what his character says or does. Important characters are met, to which the Rogue sighs loudly over Discord at the roleplay, and states in character often, quote, "Can we deal with my stuff now?" Combat entails with the mage hunters that are following them, to which the Rogue rolls ridiculously well, ending with him decapitating the final bad guy against his fellow party members' wishes. A natural 20 religion roll from Cleric revives the man, leading to some emotional moments that tied in with the Cleric's backstory, and many sighs coming from the Rogue. Until, eventually, the Cleric was left as the Rogue walked off into the darkness of the tunnels, stating that he wanted to re-roll a warrior. He was never invited back to another session. Rogue definitely showed off his that guy colors right off the bat with that whole naked business. "Oh, this is a world where I can do anything? The possibilities are endless. I know. Naked!" And then when the roleplay started, he also showed the second problem player behavior of being a spotlight hog. Perhaps the DM and Cleric player should have had a chat with him before straight kicking him, but with the maturity that Rogue showed, that probably wouldn't have gone anywhere. Though, what do you think? Let's get to the next one. Well, then maybe you depict the character a bit less realistically. By Reddit user, Lip Crow. I used to play D&D with a guy. Let's call him Keith. He was a pretty chill dude, nice and friendly. He liked to experiment with mechanics and go in depth with RP. Why is it on this sub then? He went too deep into RP, like Tropic Thunder, Robert Downey Jr. deep. Every campaign I ever played with the dude always went the exact same way. He comes up with a very cool character premise, everyone gets excited, then bam, the first instance of adversity occurs, and the character just loses it completely. We get sent into a tomb to deal with a necromancer. We walk into a room and meet zombies, and we easily dispatch them. Then we try to move on to the next room, except Keith's character isn't with us. He stayed behind because he's terrified, and insists on RPing out the trauma. We spend an hour convincing him to continue the adventure. We go into another room where more undead attack. Keith's character, now traumatized, just bolts. We now have combat with the whole character short. It is now unbalanced, and one of us dies, because that's just low-level combat. Well, whatever. The player goes off and redos a character. Backstory to be determined, and they'll rejoin next session. No biggie. Now, normally, we'd just clear out this dungeon, get back into town, and they'd rejoin. Nope. Keith's character is now working through the death of his close personal friend he had known for all of 3 hours. Oh, cruel world. It got so bad that the dead character's replacement basically had to Kool-Aid Man through the wall so that their player doesn't spend an entire session waiting on us. These were not fun sessions. A second minor Keith story. Keith joins our game mid-campaign. The idea is, the party rolls into town, finds Keith's character imprisoned in the town square, and recruits them. Well, it turns out Keith's character doesn't want to join. One of our characters is a Dragonborn, and Keith's character has a very deep, very well-written bone to pick with all dragon and their kin. No idea what that backstory was, because we never recruited that character, and Keith had to re-roll. Now, I can understand getting into character, but this was just overkill. It sounds like Keith had a bit of main character syndrome and wanted the story to focus on his character's trauma, making the party basically spend an hour convincing his character to go along with them. Though, this is also partially the DM's fault for allowing Keith to take that amount of time. Also, why would you spend time making a character that would ultimately not join the party due to there being a Dragonborn? I'm legit confused. Anyway, let's move on to the next story before my brain explodes. Chaotic Tabaxi plays against the party by Reddit user Ishpard2. I have been playing Dragon's Heist in a Discord server for a little while now, and our Tabaxi Ranger has been an issue since the beginning. Relevant cast: DM, cool dude. Fathomless Warlock, playing the dead party member. Fighter, an old friend of mine, new to DnD. Monk, great ally. Celestial Warlock, me. Tabaxi Ranger, the problem player. I will go through the problems chronologically, but I won't go into the details of the story in order to avoid spoilers. Early on, our party decided that the low-level thugs our enemies were employing did not deserve to die, and we were able to capture them easily. The second we turn our backs, Tabaxi murders them and refuses to apologize. Minor stuff, I guess. During this time, Tabaxi also tried to control Fighter's actions in multiple occasions, since she kept making suboptimal choices in favor of role-playing, which I think is cool. This causes Fighter to quietly leave the game after the session, but I only learned the reason later on. Afterwards, our Fathomless Warlock dies to bad decisions and terrible roles, and I suggest that we should try to revive her. Tabaxi thinks that we should just throw her into the sea and be done with it. She fears we will turn her into a zombie for some reason. We have a vote, and the majority sides with me, but then Tabaxi snatches the body and makes a run for it, as Fathomless belonged to a small race, I can't remember which, so carrying her was easy. Combat and chase scene ensues, and our monk finally beats up Tabaxi and recovers Fathomless's body. We threaten Tabaxi, but we let her go. We managed to make a deal with a cleric to preserve Fathomless's body until we can get the money to bring her back. And the next day, my character convinced Tabaxi that Fathomless couldn't be revived and she was given a burial. I had a few lucky deception rolls. This ruins Tabaxi's plans of tracking the body down and destroying it to prevent resurrection. At the end of the session, I asked the player to please stop antagonizing the party so we can play the campaign together instead of against each other. This works for a little while. Forward a couple sessions. At some point in the story, Monk left the box at my character's apartment. Tabaxi saw this happen, and the player decided that due to her feline curiosity, she desperately needed to see the content of the box, which leads to the breaking point of the story. She tries to sneak into the house while my character is performing a ritual in the chimney, find familiar with my Book of Shadows, but she can't get in. She then tries to clog the chimney so the smoke forces me out of the house, but she fumbles her rolls, and my character hears her on the roof as he finishes the ritual. Tabaxi then proceeds to break a window and stand in the street with a rope tied to an arrow. When my character sees her, he opens the window and asks what she wants, and then Tabaxi fires her arrow. The plan was to hit me with the arrow and then pull the rope to make me fall into the street from the 3rd floor. 4d6 damage, I'm guessing. I'm level 3 at this point with only 24 HP. DM approves, but luckily she misses, which I follow with a Hex plus Eldritch Blast crit that one-shots Tabaxi into death saving throws. I stabilize her with Spare the Dying, but she ends up tied up by the neighbors and the city guards are on the way. After this session, I tried for a second time to have a discussion about Tabaxi's behavior, but it escalated to voices being raised. I should have waited to cool off probably. I'm done fighting her. I could have let her die as she failed 2 death saving throws, but I'm always making an effort to forgive her actions so we can be a party and just play the campaign. But Tabaxi's player isn't having it. Quote, "It's what my character would do," is the main argument used. The blame is also redirected to me for not leaving the building when she broke the window, to Monk for not showing Tabaxi the content of the box, and to DM for not describing more deeply the building where my character lives. The player also said, quote, "I'm not creating conflict. I only shot you once at the end." The argument being that conflict means actually trying to deal damage, and acting against the party by stealing from them and breaking their private property doesn't count as conflict. I'm baffled and honestly worried for their revenge once they get free. As I was writing this, I got an update on the issue. The DM wanted to give Tabaxi another chance, but the player decided to quit the game once the server staff issued a warning. This game was not the first one where the player antagonized the party. I might have managed the whole thing better probably, but at least I'm glad I don't have to fear PvP on a player's whim. As a side note, Fighter is rejoining the game now, and a new player is joining as well, so the campaign is still going strong. TLDR, player antagonizes the party and tries to throw my character from a third floor, while failing to see their behavior is conflictive. Well, I'm glad to hear that the trash took itself out in this case. I can understand wanting to play a chaotic character, but when you make said character constantly go against the party's plans and try to sabotage and attack them left and right, why would that party continue to have that character around? The Tabaxi player definitely sounded like that guy, since apparently he had done the same stuff in other games. Though I am glad to hear that the campaign is going strong after this. On to the next story. No, that's not how spells work. By Reddit user Guy82. So lately, I've been going through my backlog of horror stories and posting them here, and I think I've come to my worst experience, which isn't so bad compared to many of the stories here. Thanks, DM. This happened a little less than a year ago. So, our cast. Me, playing a golden dragon-born bard, who was a former circus performer. He was something of a pacifist, but I built him to be a massive buff-debuff character, so it worked. Wizard, a human who was a noble, and oh so amazing, righteous, and blah blah blah. She was the problem player of the group. Fighter, a half-orc and great dude all around. He was a voice of reason at the table, and good friends with the DM. He's also new. Rogue, completely unimportant to the story. He was smart enough not to get involved. And DM, just a really good DM. So, that aside, the story. We started at level 3, and issues began cropping up at about early level 4 with Wizard, who we thought was neutral good, but just turned out to be a neutral ass. They would try to veto any plans we made because she was clearly the smart one. We said, well, no. Sure, the orc was a himbo, but me and Rogue always had a relatively smooth plan most times, as much as one can have in DnD at least. She would fire back, saying that the rogue was clearly too stupid to get a job, as they grew up on the streets and were a thief, and I was just an idiot who could sing. I would really do my best to ignore this, but I would often go back at her, and quite frankly, not a great idea, but hindsight is 20/20. Her plans were pretty much just to burn everything and everyone to the ground, more or less. One of her personality traits is that I always try to find a peaceful solution. If a plan didn't involve magic, she'd go against it. If it was led by anyone but her, she'd go against it. You know the deal at this point. All this came to a head when we were attending a masquerade, which one of the BBEG's generals was attending. The plan was to use the wizard's nobility to effectively get me a pass to talk with the general, and hopefully, with some high charisma rolls, I could get him to slip up a bit and spill some info. Now, apparently, this general used to attend my character's circus performances when he was a kid, and recognized my character after a few minutes of conversation, and started pretty much parading my character around the masquerade. It was mostly for a good laugh, to relieve some tension at the table. Wizard did not like that. Now, DM, in all of his DMing skill, was smart enough to keep Wizard preoccupied with other nobles and friends from her wizard college, so that she wouldn't immediately blow up our plan. Once she saw my character being shown off, she did the following. General: "Ah, Miss Wizard, it's a pleasure to see." Wizard: "DM, I cast Charm Person." DM: are you sure?" Wizard: "Yes, I cast Charm Person on the general." DM: "Well, okay." Insert rolling noises. "So, as you're casting, your friends from college recognize the verbal and semantic components of the spell, and rush over to stop you, calling the guards over." Wizard: "Wait, what? My character doesn't do any of that. She doesn't need to do any of that to cast." DM: yes she does. Everyone does." Wizard: "That's bullshit. You're just trying to screw me over." Fighter: "Finally." Wizard then threw her D10 at Fighter, and stormed off without her stuff. She didn't even return for the dice. Fighter got his first set of his very own dice that day. Ah yes, another player with main character syndrome. How dare any of the other players get the spotlight when he is playing at the table? It's gotta make you wonder if these people ever have a thought in their head that might give them the hint of how much of an ass they are being. And if you're playing a wizard, how do you not know that you have to do verbal and semantic movements to do a spell? Well, at least the fighter got some free dice out of the whole situation. Do you have a tale about a player with the dreaded main character syndrome? Would you like it to be read on the internet by a doggo? If so, be sure to post it in the comments, on the channel subreddit, or even just DM me on Twitter. As always, I appreciate all of you who watch and like my videos, and here is more lucky for sticking to the end of the video. Until next time.